Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of CCC Q&A. We're glad you've tuned in to join us for another question. I'm Val O'Brien. I'm here today with Mike Holwerda, one of the pastors here, to answer your questions. Mike, so today's question, are you ready for it?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Is, does God still intervene in people's lives to prevent tragedies?
That's a great question.
It is a good one.
It's an easy question. I mean, it's a natural question that comes up, especially as we think about everything going on in our lives and the world around us. And it seems like the question is almost asked with a bit of doubt or a bit of fear that
absolutely.
Something has changed. God used to be more involved, used to care more, used to intervene, and now no longer does.
Right.
So it's a great question. I think at the heart of this question is how we understand who God is and how he works in this world. And there are two primary ways for us to think about. The first way is God acts in these big, supernatural, one-time ways. An easy example of that would be when he used Moses to part the Red Sea, and he led Israel out of slavery from the Egyptians.
Right.
And there you have this dramatic display of really supernatural power. That's the first way. I call it the Kardashian way. I'm not sure if God and Kardashians have been compared before, but we're going to do it now. No, and the point being is they have a flair for the dramatic and
For the high drama.
The high drama.
Yeah.
And in this way, that's how we view God's activity. This high drama, one-time, supernatural event, like a thunderstorm almost. A thunderstorm will roll in, and there'll be kind of a bolt of lightning that, in a way, is God's display of his activity, his intervening power. The second way is a little bit different. God intervenes not in this big supernatural way, but much more in a natural way. And this is what I mean. In Colossians 1, it says this. It says, all things were created through him, referring to Christ, and for him. He is before all things, and in him, in Christ, all things hold together. And the idea that we're getting described here is that God he's always working, and he's always intervening. It might not be in the big supernatural, but it could be in the very ordinary people and processes of this world that he created. The big theological word that is thrown around is providence. And providence, at the heart of it, is that our God who created this world has an ongoing, sustained presence for caring, governing, and ruling over everyone and everything.
Right.
And instead of working like a thunderstorm, his presence is much more like the sun, this ongoing, consistent impact on you and on me, on this world. That's the second way. I call it the average Joe way. It's through the ordinary versus the supernatural. It's obviously much less dramatic, which can make it harder to see, but yet no less
still
effective.
there, just the same.
Just the same.
Yeah.
An example would be how someone is healed from a particular medical condition, or let's say cancer, for example. There are people that I have known that the doctors have simply said, we don't know how, we can't explain it, but the cancer is gone and you are healed. That's a big, dramatic, supernatural healing that God can and still does. On the other hand, this is the story of my family. My brother was diagnosed with cancer, and then he was in remission through a much more ordinary way. He went through radiation, went through chemo, and scientifically everything made sense, and it was a very natural way. So the question is, does God still intervene to prevent our tragedies? I would have to say overwhelmingly, yes, he does. I think in both ways. In the Kardashian way, he can and still does intervene in these powerful, supernatural, lightning bolt displays of power.
Yeah.
We see that in healings. We see that in people being freed from addictions in a number of ways. I think part of the problem with that is we don't always know that the tragedy has been prevented because it
That's
didn't.
what I was thinking, right.
It didn't actually
You don't know.
happen.
Right.
One day we will. One day we will see the whole picture,
Yeah.
and we'll see everything that was prevented.
Yeah.
The second way, the average Joe way, I think is more pressing, and I think it's more common, where God will use ordinary people and the ordinary processes that he created to intervene into the tragedies of this world. He'll use doctors to intervene in the tragedy of cancer. He'll use counselors to intervene in the tragedy of divorce. He will use our church to intervene in the very tragedy of the refugee crisis. And so I think the question is not if God is still intervening, but really how. And it's a question that becomes very personal. It's not really as much about God as it is about you and me, and how is God wanting to use us to intervene through us in this world. So I want to end with two things. And the first is there was one tragedy that God didn't prevent. And I'm glad he didn't. For in that tragedy, we know that he sent his son to the cross for us. And because Jesus overcame and endured the greatest tragedy, we all who believe in him are freed from our eternal tragedy. And so as a church, we every Sunday we have white roses that we can see, and they highlight those who are believers in Christ. And so when we're discouraged and we're wondering that question, God, are you still intervening? I think we should look to the white roses, because there we see a very tangible evidence that God has powerfully intervened in a person's life to end their eternal tragedy. And the second thing is one day God has promised to end all tragedy. There is a day coming that he has promised when Christ returns, that the new heavens and the new earth will be here, and there will be no more tears, there will be no more sadness, there will be no more suffering, there will be no more death, and there will be no more tragedy through it all. And so on that day, he will intervene, and it will be in a very thunderstorm type way. We're told in Matthew chapter 24, it says, "For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man."
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for taking the time to answer such a good, hard question. Really, really good question. So thank you so much for sending in your questions for us. We love being able to answer them for you, so please keep them coming. You can do that following the instructions on your screen, and we'll look forward to answering another one next week. Thanks so much.